Unso is a judge of great integrity. After reading the case document, she received and saw the photo and name of the engine. Unso's whole body trembled. She couldn't control her emotions at all. In the end, he couldn't stand up anymore and fainted. It turned out that she was a young mother who had lost her child because she gave the cow of these two demons. Going back to 5 years ago, 2 elementary school students specialize in doing the stupidest mischief in this Gulf of Tonkin. Every day, they climb the rooftop and throw a brick downstairs to prove the realism of gravity. It was also their stupid actions that caused a boy to leave forever. At the trial, they presented this nonsense reason in court. Judge Ganhi said a blue sentence that it was just because the children were too hyperactive, so they were not at fault. In South Korea, children under the age of 14 are exempt from criminal prosecution and are not subject to criminal prosecution. This is to help children who have lost their way to recognize their mistakes and turn their heads back to shore. So, after only a few short minutes, the trial was over and they were whitewashed. The 2 demons dressed as children walked out of the court and smiled evilly. They blatantly passed in front of the mother with a look that challenged her to do anything to me. The husband saw his wife crying and grieving, and he also spoke up to comfort her. This life is like that. The law student just wants to help the children have the opportunity to repair and change. The wife was extremely tense and suppressed her tears. Her husband's back watched the inhuman people leave without doing anything else. It is unfair to the families of the victims. If they are so unreasonably protected by society, will they really know what is wrong and change? This will almost never exist because in the face of the grim truth, truthism is so fragile that it is shattered when touched. 5 years later, those 2 demons continue to do things that are contrary to morality. He invited 4 more friends to drag the girl into an empty corner and take turns playing evil tricks on that deep girl. It wasn't until the next morning that a worker who passed by discovered the girl. Fortunately, the police officer called the police and saved her life. At the police station, she took testimony, only remembering that there were 3 people who harmed her. The incident after being reported that the online community competed with each other and made the girl use the dirtiest words to smear her lips. They always say that the victim is the guilty person. There is no fire, there is smoke. These grim words seemed to reach the psychological limit of Sane, making her think that she couldn't understand but wanted to log out. Fortunately, her father found out in time and took her to the hospital to save her life. Soon after, he went to find In Chun, who had called her daughter out. But he still didn't have any regrets. On the contrary, he was arrogant, saying, before acting, he received the consent of Son A, and both parties volunteered. At first, they planned to find a place along the road to act, but they thought that it would be easy for others to find out, so they pulled each other to the fair. They even played a lottery to take turns to act. In Chun also proudly boasted to Sun as father that the 2 big brothers had started first and had used all kinds of poses with her. Then it was his turn. At that time, although Son A was in a coma, he still fought back fiercely. He was also drunk, so he couldn't do anything about it, which made him regret it very much. He recounted with a very convex attitude without any regrets. The father scolded in the elastic really crazy. He laughed and said that he was Son as biological father, so he probably wouldn't be able to understand the feeling of happiness they had. The father couldn't hold back anymore and threw him a punch. But life is unfair. The person locked up in the detention center is Son as father because he is still a teenager. What's even more ridiculous is that the recording file of In Shun's confession is also said to be false evidence because he was coerced, so it cannot be used as evidence in court. In the end, this case was transferred to the Unso. She is a juvenile court judge. After reading the document, seeing the photo and name of the ink, her whole body trembled. She couldn't control her emotions at all. In the end, he couldn't stand up anymore and fainted. It turned out that she was a young mother who had lost her child because of these 2 demons. After that mythical case ended, Unso made up her mind to become a juvenile judge. Spend your youth to bring those demons in the guise of angels out into the light to get justice for the victims. After all these years of trying, she had now achieved what she wanted, How could she easily ignore the perpetrator who had harmed her son? After regaining consciousness, she immediately went to court to take testimony from the printing side. He claimed that he was only following the orders of the other two. At first, they only planned to drink a little yeast and have a little fun, but they didn't intend to do anything. Moreover, he had no intention of doing anything to son A. He tried to stop the big brothers, but he was scolded and slapped by them, so he went outside and hung around at the construction site and waited for the two brothers. The court side has the result and announced that they only found the DNA of the two big guys on son as body. And they also admitted their crimes at that time, because they were 14 years old. In a few days, the court will investigate this case according to the juvenile criminal case. But Unso was very suspicious of the test results. She was going to quietly investigate the truth of the case. Suddenly, her husband, who had divorced 5 years ago, came to find her. I thought he would help me. Unexpectedly, he pulled out the law and threatened her not to participate in this case. Because she is related by blood to the victim of the case in the past, Unso asked him indifferently where he had the right to get involved in my work. We have come to this country. What else does it have to do with you? He replied that it was because I was the father of the baby. Now that you're going to take revenge on him, what's the point of doing so now? The old story is over. In the end, the person who is hurt will still be you. But uncompared to the indifferent expression on my face, I didn't care. If you keep your eyes wide open and look at me, you will make Injin receive punishment before the law. 3 days later, the first trial took place in court. But Unso didn't call the suspect, but called Injin for questioning. In addition to his previous testimonies, this time, he also said that he was threatened by two big brothers. So, I helped them do bad things even though I didn't want to do that in my heart. And he added that this case was inherently rooted in an unfair power relationship. He knew Donggun and the Bao master at school. Here he was often sent by two people to buy drugs or alcohol for a long time. As long as he argued or did something against his will, he would be hit by a blow. But Unso is keenly aware of the contradiction in Injin's testimony before and after. If he was so afraid that the other two big brothers were like that, and he listened to their words, why did the night of the crime happen? He dared to speak up to stop the other two. Could it be because of a conscience that suddenly sprung up? Hearing that, Injin deserves to be on the spot. Unso continued to ask, why did he dare to argue with them only this time? At this moment, the lawyer stood up again and said, Injin was indeed very afraid of the threats and attacks of the big brothers. But before she could finish the sentence, Injin spoke up herself. He sobbed and said, because this time it was unacceptable. They are all human beings together. Why do they commit such a crime of great fortune? If it was someone else, it would probably be deceived by his innocent appearance. But Unso already knew this bastard's shameless face. She gives Injin one last chance to tell the truth. Otherwise, she will be judged severely. But this kid still stubbornly refused to admit it. Unso reluctantly had to call witnesses to appear in court. This person is also the police officer in charge of investigating this case. The two met 3 days ago. At that time, Unso suspected that there was still evidence other than the DNA of the perpetrator. So, taking advantage of the absence of her late at night to the scene of the crime. As a result, the contractor came to the parking site every night. At the same time, he received a video recording of the scene that happened that night. With a dash cam in his car. The video shows the whole group gathering to drink yeast and then get drunk. After Sona drank drunk, the whole group laughed and roared full of guava. Prepare for your harmful behavior. The scene was clearly recorded with a dash cam. The truth is that all three of them include Injin. Finally, he ran out of ways to argue. The other lawyer continued to deny that the video was recorded. By this dash cam, it is likely to be a fallacy. But at this time, the policeman showed documents proving the authenticity of the video, provided by the court's video analysis department. In the document, it is confirmed that the video was extracted from this dash cam. There is no trace of the last testimony because of the provision of false testimony. Injin was identified as an accomplice, so he will be transferred to the juvenile criminal case for reinvestigation. Moreover, the investigation will be completed within a week and the sentencing court will be opened. But before the day of the opening of the judge's trial, Ti-Chu ran over in a panic. Then he found a new clue from another case. There is still another person who also participated in the mass murder named Du Hung. Unso didn't dare to believe her hand. She immediately glared. Because this named Du Xing was the other demon who had harmed her son. This time, the two demons committed a crime together, so take this opportunity. She will calculate the debt 5 years ago, pay both principal and interest for them. Unexpectedly, at this moment, a woman came and swung her hand and slapped her face. I've warned you, and am sure I'll find you. She couldn't hide for the rest of her life. It turns out that this person is Unso's ex-mother-in-law. She blatantly blames all the blame for her nephew's death on Unso's head. Blame her for refusing to quit her job at home and her child. She also said that she was the one who destroyed the family, destined to be her husband and son. It was very difficult to prepare to marry a new wife, who would have expected her to appear again and continue to tie the knot with him. Seeing that this skin pimple is even more disturbing, deliberately causing this incident. Unso didn't want to tie the knot with her, so he turned his head down. Unso sat in the corner and listened to the scolding that echoed. And the heart was like being torn into pieces by teeth. After her unfortunate son died, she still couldn't get rid of that obsession. Her house had no life at all. Although the needle is very small, it can make people hurt through the heart. The tongue is boneless, but it hurts people deeply, and the pain lasted for 5 years of her. It originated from the reason that it sounded like a joke even more. In the eyes of those juvenile criminals, this case is also really their laughing. The mother-in-law made a fuss about the court, leading to everyone knowing about the case 5 years ago. Judge Nan Shi also knew the truth, which coincidentally, she is the same judge who acquitted the two demons 5 years ago. But to this day, she still thinks that her judgment at that time was not wrong. As for saying that if it is handed over to another judge, the result will still be the same. Hearing this, USO couldn't help but question who the law was for after all. Laws are created to protect victims or perpetrators. If in the past the eunuch ruled to punish the other two demons at an appropriate level, not through the loudspeaker of the sentence within 3 minutes, today's tragedy would not have happened. They completely did not learn the lessons from the case in the past, but randomly assumed that they were really innocent. When they see that the law is full of loopholes, they will continue to hurt more innocent people. Hearing this, She clenched her hand. Of course she knew that USO was not wrong. But she still didn't want to admit her mistake. Only taking the USO body that had a blood relationship with the victim of the case in the past to ask her not to intervene in this case. But USO will never stop. She looked at Sun now, as if she was looking at her son in the past. She absolutely did not allow the mythical judgment of the past to appear again. Fortunately, Judge Ti-Chu found a new clue. In another rape case, he happened to collect information from Du Hung's victim. This victim girl was pregnant. According to her testimony, Kun and doxing formed a criminal gang. Do not control a lot of young women who go astray and specialize in acting out plays, deceiving and extorting money in cheap motels. It can be said that the bad name spreads far and wide for them to blackmail the village guests in the name of playing against their daughters. This trick can be said to be a victorious battle. After each such time, the gang members made a lot of money. There are young girls who are blinded by money, so they actively join their gangs. But in the end, I realized that I was just a tool to make money for them. Not only are they not allowed to share a penny, but they are also threatened with their lives when they intend to escape their control. So they were indignant in their hearts, and didn't dare to cough up half a word. And this girl managed to escape after Kun was arrested. After understanding the situation, USO quickly took action. She constantly went to find the girls who were controlled by the criminal gang. The results, no evidence of their more terrible crimes. It turns out that in the past, there were many girls who ran away and failed. Finally, they were caught by the Beast Keepers and took turns to play a bad game. Moreover, the entire process of harm was recorded. They not only used these videos to force the girls to go out to sell flowers, but also arbitrarily trade illegally online. It must be said that losing even a little bit of humanity is gone. From the girls' stories, USO soon learned where the criminal den of the capital was. So there was a chance that there was no one to sneak quietly at night. And he was going to take away all the evidence of the crime they had stored on their computers. But at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared behind her, and he suddenly asked who she was. "Are they Rice guys?" Then he smiled and grimaced. USO slipped to realize that he was doxying. At this time, Du Xiang couldn't laugh anymore. She was startled. Only she was a bastard, and then rushed around the USO. Angrily asked her if she knew how much the things in the computer were worth. As soon as he retracted his words, he swung his hand to give her a slap. She had absolutely no idea about beating a woman of her mother's age. USO slowly stood up and questioned him if he had been given the chance. He should have lived a decent life, and at least one of the two children should have lived a decent life as a human being. USO didn't understand why he could live in such a miserable way. But despite USO, the collapse of the capital still had such a greasy face, and rushed to grab the USO and said who she was preaching for. Finally, he pulled out his weapon and turned it over and put it directly on her shoulder. Just as he was about to give USO another blow, she broke the brick next to her and slammed it directly into his head. USO looked up at the shoe cabinet and discovered Sun as missing shoe at the scene of the assault. It turns out that the capital is really an accomplice in the collective murder. The display case of such shoes covered one wall. There is no doubt that each shoe symbolizes a worm girl who has been harmed. At this time, Du Xiang also walked over and confirmed that he was also present at the scene. He also sneered and challenged USO to what he wanted to do after he knew the truth. Finally, gritting his teeth and rushing towards her, he came up with the intention of going back to the old men to cover up the clues. And then, at the critical moment outside, the police siren suddenly sounded. It turned out that USO had contacted the criminal police in charge of this case from the beginning. Seeing this, Du Xiang could only leave the scene in a hurry. But he was quickly arrested by the police and all the evidence of the crime was taken away. USO refused to treat her whole body covered in dice and went to court. She wanted to use her own body to change Judge Gana's verdict. She told the judge about their crimes. After all, they harmed the victims and took advantage of them to make money. Judge Ganhe saw that she collapsed in pain and hurriedly told her to leave. She advised her to quickly go to the hospital before waiting for the ambulance to arrive. But USO endured the pain and earnestly called the judge. No matter how tough Judge Ganhe is, he must be touched by this scene. A week after the court opened the trial, the female lawyer with a malicious heart was still defending Injin with a thick face. She declares that if there is no DNA of Injin in Sun's body, then it is impossible to prove that he has committed a crime. After that, he also took out the certificate of hard work students who are willing to create, proving that Injin is always a diligent and studious student who always likes to help people. Injin was only black and intimidated by people, so when he received the investigation of the police, he just didn't elaborate on what happened. At the same time, the female lawyer also took out photos of Injin's previous injuries to testify. As for Du Heng, it is the same. The two immediately turned to push all the responsibility through the two juniors so that they could bear the blame. It was obvious that before attending the session, all the female lawyers had carefully studied the judge's previous trials. Based on Judge Ganhe's previous expedited trial method, then it is very likely that this case will also be declared innocent as before. But when he remembered what Unsu had said, and she played a recording of the confession of the other two juniors, it turns out that Taeju has succeeded in inciting them to betray the two seniors. If all the available evidence is used to reach a verdict, it is very likely the two juniors, Unsu and Dongwon, will be considered the final culprits, both of whom could be sentenced to more than 15 terms in prison. But if the current Unsu and Dongwon honestly declare, it will be considered as a crime and both can have their sentences reduced. Unseo and Dongwon could only honestly declare everything after hearing that. Dongwon affirmed that everything was done by Do-hung for the two of them. Unseo went on to say that as long as he didn't listen to Do-shing, he would scold them. Dongwon has also been tortured by the capital. In the courtroom, Do-shing heard this and immediately came out uncomfortable. Unseo also began to get angry, seeing that the situation was unstable. The defense lawyer stood up and protested. She insisted that these words were just a confession from one side. There was absolutely no direct evidence to prove it, but they couldn't believe it. These two juniors quietly left a way back for themselves after each mission. Both of them silently copied the documents to a USB drive. The judge released evidence of that crime in court. This made Do-hung and In-kun both speechless and speechless. Do-hung looked at each photo of evidence and remembered the scene of them harming the victim. After that, they also laughed and took pictures as a souvenir. When the victim's family members saw this scene, they could only shed tears of anger. Although it was already this time, Do-shing still refused to regret it. And In-kun realized that the disaster was about to fall, so the psychological defense line had completely collapsed. He stood in front of the court and affirmed that all his actions were the fault of the capital. Do-hung heard this and hurriedly retorted, so the two argued loudly in the middle of the trial. In the end, the use of force completely did not give the judge the opportunity to interrogate. They competed to denounce the enemy's criminal behavior. Considering everything to this extent, the court will also reduce the work. Both In-kun and Do-hung proved themselves to be the culprits. Judge Ganshi didn't say much to them anymore. She wanted to let the victim listen to the trial outside. At the end of this trial, in fact, Sun A originally did not want to testify. She felt that she had no face to live on. There were even too many times when she thought about giving up. However, Unseo advised her. She said that the people who should feel the most embarrassed in the world should be those criminals, including In-kun and doxing guilds. It also includes the people who like to explain the court on the internet. They are the most unforgivable. The fact that the victim harms himself will only make them more overbearing and greasy. Only when she goes to court to attend the trial herself can she hold her head high and live confidently in the future. So Sun A bravely spoke out in court. She trembled and said, please make my life go back to the way it used to be. She said it as if she had used up all her life's courage. As soon as she spoke, she couldn't hold back her tears. The sound of her boiling water reached the courtroom, making everyone in pain and choking. Only the two perpetrators were unemotional. In the end, In-kun and Do-hung were sentenced to 25 years in prison. Although the winding process of the case is firmly carried, it can also be considered as a complete result. But the pain they left behind would never go away. The victim had to live with pain for the rest of his life. For example, Unseo had to live as a lifeless body for many years. Although the perpetrator who harmed her son has been punished, nostalgia is deep in her heart. At this moment, he completely burst out looking at each of his son's relics. She sobbed, full of pain. Her intestines and liver seemed to be broken. After looking at his son's photo for the last time, Unseo took all the relics to the mortuary. The last time, he burned everything for his son in heaven. Her life still has to go on. After this incident, Unseo was no longer in trouble. She has just started the juvenile crime trial. The very next day, Unseo received a case of dismemberment that shook the whole country. A 13-year-old boy tricked an 8-year-old boy into the house. After ruthlessly harming the body was divided. Late at night, the body was thrown on the rooftop. But strangely, after committing the crime, he ran to the police station and confessed that he had dealt with the person. The police were extremely surprised when they heard that. After that, I only saw him pull out a kite with blood on it, and he said that he committed the crime alone. Based on his description, the police quickly found the victim on the rooftop and arrested the perpetrator immediately. The teenager, named Songwoo, lived in the same apartment as the 8-year-old victim. It was spread quickly to attract the attention of the public. Because Song-woo is not yet 14 years old, he will be exempt from criminal liability under South Korea's Juvenile Protection Act. At most, they're only sent to re-education camps for 2 years. This immediately stimulated the people to protest for the repeal of the law to protect young people. The perpetrator must be treated. Late at night, Unseo sat reading Song-woo's documents and found that he had just graduated from high school. Has a criminal record of intentionally causing injury many times. Living in a single-parent family, he still suffers from schizophrenia, severe emotions, and has to take medication to maintain his sanity. And this is extremely likely to be the reason for his escape. Of course, Unseo guessed not wrong according to Song-woo's testimony. That day, his illness suddenly recurred in a panic, and the other boy came to borrow his phone. Song-woo tried to stay awake and lead the boy home. But because the child was playful, he saw a lot of toys in the house, so he stayed in his house. For a long time, he was lean and asked him to play with him. Song-woo was bothered by the boy and finally couldn't stand it anymore and got angry to deal with him. Song-woo rushed in and grabbed the boy, telling him to play hide and seek with me. If I haven't found you, you must hide in one place. If you go out on your own, or let me find you, I'll deal with you. The boy was scared and had to hide under the forest, but was eventually caught by Song-woo. After a series of happy laughs, he began to commit crimes. That's why he was interested in telling everything in court, which made everyone both impregnate and hate. But because he also knew that he was not old enough to be criminally liable, his attitude was extremely challenging thanks to him. That look without the slightest panic or regret made everyone present hate to the point of hatred forever. It wasn't until the halftime break that Song-woo's mother came unexpectedly, but she didn't come to apologize. As soon as he opened his mouth, he pulled out the law to protect minors and asked the court to handle leniency. It's true that a stupid mother is a bad child. Song-woo angrily stood up and asked her to apologize to the victim's family first and then talk about other things. After that, the victim's mother also came to court. Song-woo saw the other party's tragic crying, and he couldn't help but be moved, but his eyes were also wet. The mother had no other requirements, but wanted the perpetrator to receive appropriate punishment. She knew that the court could not accept it, so she cooked some of her son's favorite dishes to give to her. That night, Unseo took out the rice and enjoyed it carefully. At other times, the responsibility on her shoulders seemed to be even heavier. She stayed up all night studying documents. The next day, Song-woo went to court again to face questions from the judge. The more he answered, the more impatient he became, as if he wanted to get away with it. So the RAFT used the medical records to prove that his emotional schizophrenia became severe. Having a mental illness plus not yet 14 years old, but Woo is confident of winning. But when he saw this, he smiled and looked directly into Song-woo's eyes and said, "You're not the culprit, are you?" It turned out that the night before, when she was reading the document, she had discovered something unusual. That is schizophrenic lying syndrome, which often appears with testimonies such as auditory hallucinations and hallucinations. According to ordinary interest, it would not be enough to do such complicated things alone. It is also impossible to concentrate thoughts, so there is no need to mention what to do after harming people. For example, completing a clean cleaning of the scene has been seen to have the ability to remove traces neatly. A thing that even if you are an adult, you may not be able to do. Yet he could not only harm a person and clean up the scene, and even get it done easily. This shows that there must be a third person involved in the scene, and that is the real perpetrator of the case. Song-woo, who is not yet 14 years old, can be so arrogant. There must have been collusion in advance, and deliberately came out to confess. This was not just Yuso's speculation at all, but she checked the camera in the elevator where the crime occurred. They discovered traces of a third person. It was a schoolgirl named John. After hearing this, Song-woo lost his temper and realized that it was not her. She had nothing to do with this incident. But Song-woo's act of losing his temper further proves that Yuso's speculations are completely correct. The court also collected the history of the two people's calls as evidence, and learned that before the crime, he had a very close contact with John. Song-woo saw this and wanted to snatch the photo back, even though he didn't say a word from beginning to end. But the truth is still unraveled in the end. Song was taken into custody, and then USO told Tae-chu to go to the police station to extract the camera, and found that when Song-woo came to confess, he always looked in one direction. And the person standing opposite the police at that time was John. In order to catch her, he first went to see her former classmate first, knowing that every night she would go to an internet shop that was open through the night. USO grasped the situation and decided to start acting in the night, but was unexpectedly stopped by Song-woo's mother. She pretended not to like life and asked USO to release her son. But poor people also have very hateful moments. If you just beg or threaten, you can help the criminal escape the crime. Then USO's work doesn't mean anything anymore. She didn't want to explain many words, and then decisively kicked the thorn and drove away. Soon USO went to the internet shop and found John, and also clarified his identity. After that, John also stood up obediently and coordinated, but when she came to the turn, she suddenly jumped out and tried her best to run away. But now that he is running, it is no longer meaningful. After a fierce chase at the end, John is stopped in a narrow dead end. USO looked at her with an expressionless expression and cold eyes. Her eyes clearly showed the hatred that any young man criminal looked at would have to use him. John has dropped out of 5 grades, 10 of her parents are busy with business, and don't want to waste time. So, he spent a large amount of money to invite a lawyer to defend John through this. It can be seen that behind a child, a young man who goes astray, is often a pair of irresponsible parents. In the face of USO's sharp interrogations, John maintained an innocent expression and opened his mouth, because the lawyer had previously instructed her to use guardianship. So, until he saw the history of the conversation, John remained silent. There was no other way. USO could only show a surveillance video on the day of the incident. Ask why John was at the crime scene. John was confused at this time, clenched his hands, and his eyes also rolled back and forth. She slowly replied that she was only sharing the elevator with Song-woo. It's also a crime to be naive to ask such a question. Although John refused to admit guilt, the truth is that she appeared at the crime scene. So USO used the excuse that John was a serious suspect in the case and asked the police to detain her. But John's lawyer also quickly came up with a response trick. The next day, she hired someone to guide public opinion to slander the court, together with the information that Judge USO threatened to arrest the girl. At the same time, she accused her of serious violations of the usual verification procedure. Moreover, she also has a negative one-sided view of young criminals. He also said that USO did not deserve to be a juvenile crime judge. After learning the news of the chief judge of the court, the young man immediately became angry. But USO was not afraid, and she even strongly objected. At least the court must be able to uncover the truth. Isn't it the duty of law enforcers like them? What if after the trial is over, the young man? What about not being able to understand the law and its value? At those times, what should law enforcers like them do? If the young man after adulthood is even more evil, and if it hurts more people, who will be responsible? USO insists that they have to let these young criminals know how scary the law is. It is necessary to educate young criminals that if they hurt others, they will pay a heavy price. If parents feel sorry for their children and want to protect their children, the family needs to coordinate with the court. USO thought that this was the reason she was standing here. She also questioned the chief judge to ask him, what did she do wrong as a judge after all? After all, what crime did she commit in the West? In the face of the legitimate and sharp questions of the USO, the chief judge could only be silent. Of course, he also knew that what USO said was true. It was just that he didn't want the court to suffer a loss of reputation and honor. From there, it affects the prestige of the judiciary. But fairness lies in the heart of every person whose prestige is built. Not only relying on online sources, but relying on fair and transparent trials and rulings. USO expressed that he would never easily spare any young criminal. She then calls Judy to visit Song-woo's mother and informs her that there was a third person at the scene of the crime. If she can advise her son to take the initiative to surrender, he will definitely be lenient. At first glance, Song-woo's mother recognized Joan. Although she didn't believe it very much because of her son, she still decided to agree. Not long after, it was the day of the opening of the trial, and indeed Song-woo had completely changed his previous wild disposition. Standing in front of the court, Song-woo said that everything was done by him receiving instructions from Jaeon. On the day of the incident, Jaeon took the boys to his house. In the end, the person who dealt with the victim was also Jaeon. He only provided the place where the crime was committed. Moreover, before that heartbreaking incident, he didn't know that Jaeon was harming people. Song-woo was terrified and couldn't believe it, scolding her for being crazy. He didn't know what to do now, but Jaeon said that we were both accomplices and we could both live. After hearing him testify like that in front of the court, he didn't expect Song-woo to betray him. However, the lawyer had prepared for this situation in advance. She still kept the original way of speaking. Believing that Jaeon had a very serious delusional disorder, the doctor who treated her even went to court to testify. To be more precise, this delusional delusion can also be called the delusion of being harmed. Patients are completely unable to control their words. Even a small incident in life can lead to the onset of uncontrollable emotions. They are angry and can hurt others. Therefore, her motive for committing the crime is difficult to confirm. If Jaeon was in a state of delusional lying at the time of the crime, there was no way to convict her. However, there is still another very important question, which is Jaeon's paranoid lying syndrome. Song-woo's emotional schizophrenia syndrome all share the same trait. It is absolutely incapable of doing such things and cleaning up so cleanly. So who did those things after all? At this time, Jaeon suddenly called Song-woo's name and said that it was Song-woo who asked her to do so. He stood outside the toilet teaching her how to handle the victim and teaching her how to escape the scene. She rushed to the water tank on the rooftop and threw away the garbage bag. It was Song-woo who had threatened her to do so. After hearing this, Song-woo shouted that it was Jaeon who did it himself. At that time, she said that she would not be caught by the surveillance camera. The two of them kept pouring back and forth to each other, and neither cat gave in to any cats. At this time, the victim's mother shouted and told both of them to hold their mouths and leave. Her expression was full of pain and begged the other two not to speak anymore. It doesn't matter if it's delusional syndrome or schizophrenic lying syndrome. As for the victim's parents, she only knows that her son was lured to their house by a stranger. Finally passed away in pain and despair without her mother by her side. Just thinking about this, the mother couldn't suppress the pain. She immediately asked the entire judge and the chief judge to be in court. Asking them not to let this heartbreaking incident happen again must strictly control the perpetrator. The whole trial was silent and silent. Only the mother's painful cry remained. The chief judge announced a temporary break. After discussing with his colleagues, the chief judge still decided to follow Yuso's opinion. Sentenced to 25 years in prison for John, while Song-woo will be sent to a youth convalescent camp for 2 years. After hearing this, John shouted for the court to rule again. Later, she was imprisoned in prison for 25 years, and she got angry and cursed everyone for rioting in court. And Song-woo bowed his head with a regretful expression. Everyone knows that kids like John are completely unteachable. Even if she is locked up in prison for 25 years after being released from prison, she will probably continue to be a bad person in society. This is also a reluctant aspect of the law, but only a few courts have brought into play their inherent effect. Although it is impossible to change the nature of juvenile criminals, all responsibility should not be placed on the head of the law. If parents had taught their children properly, those heartbreaking tragedies would not have occurred. But just look at the date of the opening of the trial. And John's parents still didn't show their faces so they could see what kind of people her parents were. If parents don't try to teach, the children will never change. After the trial, Sung's mother went to Judge Tae-chu and said that he had apparently promised a lenient trial. Then her son had to be released immediately? Instead of her attitude of throwing her jaw, Unso finally couldn't help but speak up. The sentence for Sanggu was already very light, and if she was not satisfied, she could resist the sentence. At that time, she will carefully consider how many years of imprisonment she should sentence. Later, Unso told her there was an idiom called gut pain to refer to the pain of parents who lose their children. What did she do for him when she was 9 years old? The victim of this case was only 9 years old, and the boy's mother had permanently lost her child, all because of her son. Unso's words made Sunggu's mother very emotional. It wasn't until late at night when she came home and saw the distortion left on the floor that she felt the pain. The crime that was committed could never erase the house. Now regretting it is too late. The case of harming the person who divided the body shook the whole country, although it has ended here. But that doesn't mean it's over. Do these juvenile delinquents really repent of their crimes? Will they continue to reoffend during the rehabilitation period? No one can guarantee this. The next day, the court suddenly received a phone call related to the juvenile reformatory. Said the director was suspected of embezzlement of funding money and child abuse. After receiving this news, USO and Techu immediately went to the reformatory to investigate. They took turns asking questions to the young girls. The result terrified the two of them, each of whom was harmed on different levels. For example, every time she eats, the director will feed them burnt rice and cook new rice for her daughter. Once someone suggested that she would not eat, she would take their bowl and throw it on the ground and say, "A girl like you doesn't even have rice at home, but she dares to eat fish soup and choose soup." After that, she stopped feeding them. The girls had to bow their heads and apologize. She promised to speak more politely and asked her to feed her. But she asked the opposite. Wasn't she full? After eating your fill, go to the room to rest. The girl continued to cry, admit her fault, and then she scolded her again. She was not allowed to cry, only to bring bad luck to her. If she dared to cry again, she wouldn't hold back. Not only that, they are also forced to go to people's homes in the area to do housework to earn extra income. As long as they dare to resist, they will be beaten like a blow. There is even a girl with a broken bone who has to be hospitalized and is still lying in a hospital bed. Although these young criminals brought here for renovation, but to this extent, it's too loud. USO and Techu immediately investigate the records of the reformatory camp throughout the night. They quickly found evidence that the director embezzled the funding. The next day, they called her for questioning. Unexpectedly, she told a story that was completely contrary to the testimony of adult criminals. She had been dedicated to taking care of them for a long time, but the girls were not satisfied. Constantly asked to smoke while eating. After being rejected by the director, they scolded her and smashed the dishes on the table. She asked them what they were going to do. Didn't they appreciate food? So a bitter girl said that she was going to say that she was the kind of girl. As if they were at home, they didn't even have rice to eat. Do you dare to choose fish soup now? She told them not to look at her like that. Her stamina was limited. So the daughter declared not to eat. Getting up and kicking the chair and leaving, she scolded her not to eat anymore. She didn't have the right to eat. At this time, the director's Seema daughter stood up and said that it was just early in the morning. What are you doing? The other girls laughed warmly while parodying Seema's words. The director didn't dare to do anything. They could only quietly clean up the scandal on the floor. As for having to do housework for people in the area, there is actually a reason. When this juvenile crime re-education camp was first built, it has been strongly opposed by people in the area. Everyone thinks that juvenile offenders should not appear in the area where they live. Therefore, in order to ease relations with people in the region, the director personally led them to people's homes to help them work. Moreover, they also organize collective activities with the aim of changing prejudice in people's hearts. However, Zhongshan is easy to change nature and difficult to leave. They still pull their factions together, bullying those who repent and try to rehabilitate. It is even so cruel that it breaks people's legs. To confirm whether the director's testimony is true or not, Unso called the other girls into the office and then made a phone call to the hospital. In the end, the truth is also clear. Indeed, honesty cannot sensitize crime. For juvenile criminals like them, they must be punished severely, making them afraid of the law from the bottom of their hearts. Unso then goes to the hospital to visit the injured girl. At this time, I knew that the director visited the sponsorship box not for self-interest, but to pay her fees. She is still overly optimistic about juvenile delinquency, because if this is exposed in front of everyone, they will be punished by the law again. Therefore, the director arbitrarily and quietly visited the public fund. The girl said that after being discharged from the hospital, she would work hard to make up for this money and begged Unso not to close the reformatory door, because she sincerely considers that place her home, and she also considers the director like her mother. Because after coming to the reformatory, she knew the feeling of being loved by someone who picked up the food and put it in her bowl. She told herself that after the end of the renovation period, she must live a decent life. She has also set new goals for her life. She wants to repay the director's gratitude. After realizing that he misunderstood the director, Unso immediately drove to the rehab run in the night, but only saw a pile of sleep. It seems that there was a brawl here. Moreover, the juvenile delinquent children and the director do not know their whereabouts. Only the director's Seema daughter is left here. Unso immediately asked her what had happened. Seema said her mother had just been taken away by an ambulance. Unso couldn't believe it when he heard the news that the reformatory was about to be closed. The director was shocked and fainted on the spot. Because of this, Seema was overly agitated to think that his mother had been harmed by the criminals of that young man. She even thought that she couldn't see her father because of them. Her mother told her that her father had been sent abroad to work and could not return. But it was all just a lie because her parents had divorced a long time ago. Just because of this place, her mother refused to let go. Because this nonsense education center is all harmed by those naughty girls. A few days ago, her sister had a very severe abdominal pain and was even taken to the hospital. But in the end, her mother still didn't pick her up because compared to her biological daughter, who was lying in the hospital room, then it was even more important to feed those spoiled girls. Every time she considers others more important than her own daughter. Now that USO knows, the phone call to denounce it was not called by those juvenile criminals. Rather, it is Seema because of his mother, so he wants to borrow this excuse to close the door of the reformatory. Fortunately, the director has no problems to worry about. And the other juvenile criminals took the opportunity to escape together. After they are no longer bound, the seeds of evil hidden deep in their hearts are also about to explode. Everyone immediately ran to a nearby police station to report the crime and then divided into groups to find their whereabouts. Unexpectedly, at this moment, a girl suddenly took the initiative to contact them. It turned out that she was one of a group of juvenile criminals who actively ran away, she said. A girl named Rengna forced all the other girls to sell flowers at the motel to make money. The call was in the middle of a conversation when suddenly Rengna appeared and grabbed her. Upon receiving this news, the USO team immediately took action, but at this time the girl was locked in a rented room. Rengna also stood downstairs watching the girl who wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to escape. Unexpectedly, at this time, a man entered the room without saying no and immediately locked the door with a chain. The girl asked him what he was doing. Why did he lock the door? He turned his head and said frankly that there are too many people who have received money at this time. So, he had to be careful to take advantage of the other party's bath. The girl hurriedly opened the man's backpack to find a key and was so frightened that she almost ran out. Because the backpack is full of nonsense, not any other items, not even a single penny in the wallet. The girl had to try to unlock the man's phone to call the police. But at this moment, the sound of running water suddenly stopped, and the girl was handled by the man, bringing her to cheat her money. Fortunately, at this time, USO led the police here to search. At this moment, a voice came in from outside the door. The police are here. Please cooperate with the police. Just at the critical moment, the police outside heard a strange noise in the room and promptly broke down the door and rushed in. The man tried to jump through the window to escape, but was immediately arrested by the police. In the end, all the other girls were found and taken away, but they were nowhere to be found. After interrogating the girls, the police found out. Then the Sima family knew that Jiang Na had a deep affection for her mother. So talking to her that night, she lied that her mother was critically ill. So USO and the director went to Gianna's mother's place. Sure enough, she quickly found Jiang Na sitting on the stairs. Her face was distorted, and she didn't look very good. Then last night, she really came here to find her mother, but she was not seriously ill at all, so she still found new joy. Moreover, he was extremely disgusted with Jiang Na, even though she is her biological daughter, because she has to live in a family with divorced parents since childhood. In addition, the mother has been using her since she abandoned her, so Jiang Na is very lacking in love. She is a big fan of children who grow up in the arms of their parents. The mother's attitude made her unable to hold back her emotions from love to hate. She frantically slammed the door and called her mother out. A man opened the door and asked who she was. Jiang Na frantically wanted to break into the house, but was stopped by the man and scolded as a madman. The mother stared at her daughter being scolded by her mistress without saying a word, and even turned her head away. Vulnerable children often tend to be self-disciplined. Moreover, it will be easy to commit criminal acts or mix with prostitutes in society. In the end, he completely turned into a criminal. In fact, from the beginning they know that their behavior is wrong, but they still deliberately commit crimes. Because they want the pain of self-torture to hurt their own relatives. The other girls and Sima too. Their purpose is simple, they just want to attract the attention of adults. Wanting to let them know their pain, hoping that adults will not ignore them, but the results are not as desired. In fact, most of the offenses stem from family circumstances, courts, or reformatory camps that only serve as support. The biggest cause of committing crimes at a young age is still due to lack of love. And this problem will forever not be solved. Parents who fail all their lives have the right to speak out absolutely to their children. So there are adults who don't know how to love others at all. USO hopes that the director will learn from this case. Don't wait until your daughter also turns into a young criminal, then regret it. The director recovered and returned with his daughter. She called her name and walked over and hugged her child's shoulder blades. She was too tired to give her a hug. My daughter smiled happily, but still showed a lie. So the mother and daughter of the director understood each other's hearts, and the mother-daughter relationship gradually strengthened. On the side of the court, the young man, after going through the discussion during the break, they decided to continue to open the reformatory camp. But the group bullying and Jiang Na's case cannot be ignored. The next day, the young criminals were gathered to hear the verdict. Each person was sent to more stringent juvenile re-education camps to receive rehabilitation. Moreover, this time, parents also need to receive educational reform with them, especially Jiang Na's parents. The guardian finally met their heads, and they were all concentrated in the back. They looked extremely ashamed, but in the end they felt ashamed of their children. Or feel ashamed because they haven't educated their children well. Although this is not as predictable as looking at the way they are sitting in the courtroom. Perhaps most of them do not have the concept of shame. So the verdict was made. At the same time, the court's dispute summoned the chief judge of the Juvenile Trial Division to the office. Recently, there was a case of taking the exam at a high school. Moreover, the students of this school are all elite children. Among these children are children who are children of political figures of caliber and in photo sets. This is an extremely difficult case on a collective scale. The dispute decided to hand over the full right to handle it to the chief judge, and he also happily accepted. After completing this case, he will resign to participate in politics. As it turns out, he has always had a dream of reforming the law that applies to juvenile delinquents. This can only be done by becoming a member of parliament. And this case will also be his last. Chief Judge Jiang was extremely confident. Unexpectedly, as soon as he walked out the door, he received a phone call from the police. His son was so scared that he didn't dare to open the door, but his son also participated in the road case. After thinking about the words he had promised to the court, the chief judge returned home in great anger. Fortunately, the police did not come because of the road, but they only came to investigate a recent traffic accident. The chief judge angrily threw and smashed the furniture that was obvious earlier. He had already forbidden the mother and daughter from participating in the case. The mother affirmed that her son only participated once and then did not participate again. And there are many people who also participate, only the principal. Just knowing the list of many people who violate the same thing, it will probably be okay. But now the whole society is turning its eyes to this incident. The chief judge clearly knew that it was not that simple. If it is exposed, the future of his son and his career will end. The chief judge asked his son angrily. He had warned him before, this was an extremely dangerous thing, forbidding him from participating. But why still go against his word? He was extremely hard, seemed to have lost his luck, and there was no way to save this incident. And the mother is now aware of the seriousness of the incident. She began to scream in pain because she had ruined the future of both her husband and son. The next day, the case was posted on news sites and the chief judge's participation was also announced. But the Shinju son didn't want to discredit his father, so he ran to the police station to prepare to surrender. Late in the evening, when the chief judge went out to eat with the counselors. When he receives a call from the police, he finds out that when Shinju crosses the street, he has an accident and is seriously injured. He is currently lying in the emergency room looking at his son in a coma and unconscious, and his wife crying next to him. The chief judge suddenly became extremely empty. He remembered that he had scolded his son before. Go see the elders by himself. Don't drag others with him. She just said that this was all his fault. In the past, the chief judge had always compared Shinju to his second son, and he scolded him for being too bad at whistles. As the judge's son, he is ranked first from the bottom up. This made him feel extremely embarrassed, which is why Shinju felt extremely pressured. Because he wants to be recognized by his father, he studies extremely hard every day, but his performance does not improve at all. At that time, the school knew that he was the judge's child, so they took the initiative to invite him to participate in the case. This led to his only mistake, but since that incident, Shinju has felt extremely embarrassed. Therefore, he withdrew and did not participate anymore. After all, he was a good child. The chief judge didn't understand these things before. He finally realized his mistake. He then went to the council and wanted to withdraw from the election. But he was rejected by the other party because for South Korean politicians, incidents like just now are also very normal. Moreover, they are considered small things. If he doesn't run for office now, the media will follow him. The counselor asked to quickly resolve the case. After that, the chief judge secretly went to meet the person in charge of the case. Tell him that tomorrow in court, just deny it. Not only students and schools deny their crimes. Even parents think that the disclosure of questions is very normal. A parent stood up and explained that in the old days, to pass Seoul University, you just had to study hard. But now, if a child wants to get into Seoul University, but only studying at a simple school is impossible to pass. Therefore, parents need to spend a lot of money to hire PhD students to help their children study. Then they will have to go through decades and hundreds of exams at the school to evaluate the survey. Hearing this parent's words, you so couldn't help but be surprised. If it was so troublesome, why not refuse to let the children study as usual? But the parents continued to explain. Because the university exam is like a battlefield and wants to be good for his child, he agreed to that offer. If she didn't agree, there would be other children who would be like that. In his son's place on the scoreboard, even if there is a gap of 1 or 2 points, he is also in the top 1 and top 10. This parent emphasized that the fact that the children received the answers to the test was not due to the poor learning of the children. It's because they need to spend time reviewing other subjects to prepare to fight on the harsh battlefield of life and death called the university exam. The parents' words made those present in court speechless. As for the parents, the more they talked, the angrier they became, and even asked the judge when the case would end. Since her children still have to take extra classes, it seems that they still don't feel guilty about this. Immediately afterwards, Chief Judge Jeong ended the trial and released all witnesses. Later, USO went into Judge Jiang's room and asked him the right question. Unexpectedly, Chief Judge Jiang reacted extremely harshly and angrily, which surprised her very much. He told her she should know her fate, not to let things go too far. She should know how much power she has. If you continue, then I will give you a letter of resignation immediately. This incident made USO feel extremely unusual. There must be something wrong in this case. A few days later, USO continued to go to court to try the case. At this time, a boy stood up and testified that he had heard the principal talking to someone on the phone. There were a total of 24 students involved in the case, including 3 whose names had been redacted, but he could not hear the names of those 3 people. Hearing this, USO speculates that the children are involved in this case only to reduce the burden of going to extra school. On the list are also children with extremely good achievements. And among those 3 children, it is definitely the children of the legislator or the person with the right to make the chief judge so respectful. It is also not excluded that these 3 students withdraw in the middle of the school. After a final search, USO found 6 students suspected of being involved in this case. Accidentally, her gaze stopped on a student's file. It was Shinju, the son of Chief Judge Jiang. It seemed that all of her inferences were going in the right direction, but she still had no evidence to prove this. We continued to come to the 3rd trial. This time, the chief judge of the steel strike announced that the whole session would be accelerated. All witnesses who participated were rejected by him. The prosecutor stood up and said that every witness was ready and there was no good reason to deny this. But Chief Judge Jiang still left it out of his hands and resolutely refused to testify. USO looked at Chief Judge Jiang with extremely uncomfortable eyes. She announced the suspension of the trial for the panel to discuss again. Everyone present at the trial was extremely surprised. Immediately afterwards, Chief Judge Jiang was extremely angry and shouted at her. He scolded her for being a child and daring to overtake a big car. USO was not afraid of his features, but deliberately mentioned the name of the Shinju, causing him to stand still for a few seconds. At this time, Chief Judge Jiang still stubbornly thought that she was speculating and had no evidence for it. And she was deliberately slandering his son. If she didn't stop this, he would find a way to fight back. After that, he quietly left, thinking that it would be over soon. The next day, when he entered the chief judge's room, Jiang was extremely surprised to see the court and the USO here. It turned out that USO reported this incident to the court. At that time, Chief Judge Jiang even said that USO had slandered to turn his head. USO wasn't afraid. She seemed to have anticipated this, and she gave him evidence that made him hold back. Yesterday, USO went to the hospital to visit Shinju as soon as he woke up. He said that he had gone to the court that day to confess. But what he was extremely distressed about was that this would affect his father. If he lost at first because of him, it would be humiliating. He didn't want that to happen, and after thinking for a while, in order not to hurt anyone, he went to donate his own life, and he thought it was the best way at the moment. USO was very sympathetic and tried to convince the boy. Every one of us will make at least one mistake in our lives. But the important thing is that we know how to see what is wrong and act to correct it afterwards. These advice from USO had an effect, and Shinju admitted everything himself. Back in the judge's office at this time, USO gave evidence in front of everyone. This made Chief Judge Jiang unable to say anything more. The chief judge decided to give Mr. Jiang a day to pack up and take the initiative to resign. Through this incident, we can see that Chief Judge Jiang is not a bad person. His goal was to enter politics and reform the law for minors. He wants to use the wrong way to get right. This is typical meritocracy, and it is about whether meritocracy is right or wrong. It must be determined from the flip side of idealism. The result of idealism is that a person who is likely to develop the judiciary is forced to resign. Making the public doubt the credibility of the court makes an organization that is operating stably fall to the surface. If a person must be 10 out of 10 without any mistakes or defects, then everyone will have to re-examine themselves. In the end, in this society, everyone only lives for themselves, putting their own self-interest first. then no one will dare to speak out for justice. But the reality is that any justice will eventually prevail. Because in any regime, it is necessary to have good people and capable people to coordinate with each other. Only then can it have a greater effect. At present, a competent person like Judge Truong Jong. The task of reforming the law had to be handed over to someone as good as Unzo. While the final trial was taking place, he left quietly alone. Only Judge Tizhou came to see him off. He took out a photo. It turns out that he was also a juvenile criminal in the past, and also one of the many people who received help from Judge Truong Jong. He began to talk about his first days in court office. Judge Chong Jiang said he recognized him from the first time they met, and he was also extremely grateful that he had become a good person. At this time, Tichu finally tied a thick rope for Mr. Jiang, like the way he tied a thick rope to him years ago when he was still a juvenile offender. The image of Judge Truong Jong at that time made him remember deeply and never forget. He always remembers all his kind actions towards him. In this moment, the two of them said their last goodbyes to each other. Judge Truong Jong reminded him to absolutely follow the path of righteousness. The courage to seek the truth, like USO must not make the same mistakes as he did. After speaking, he immediately turned to go downstairs. Tae Chu in the back met the last person first, making him say goodbye to Judge Truong Jong. Show your respect and respect for him. Returning to USO, she received a letter left by Judge Chong Jiang. In the letter, he said that he didn't actually hate her at all, just that he was angry sometimes, so he was a little loud. He saw that Yuso's words were not wrong, and her actions were very correct and very righteous. He hoped that USO could become a good judge to restore justice for the victim, and the crimes will be brought to light. He also hoped she could finish her burgeoning career, implement legal reforms for minors in the future. As for the outcome, it can only be decided by heaven. Just like the juvenile justice system. In Korea today, no one can come up with a perfect solution. The leniency of the law so far will be equivalent to condoning the behavior of criminals. Make them more dangerous. Because the young man is not yet aware of his behavior. They are very susceptible to external influences. Just like polluted puddles, they can't clean themselves. If society cannot punish them, then it is mandatory to resort to the law. And Unso will be a good judge who uses justice and right to do that. Okay, the movie is coming to an end. Please spend 3 seconds registering for the channel to support us. Thank you for watching our channel. See you in the next movie.